Okay. All right. If you are in the lobby, please, we invite you to come join the session itself so that you will have access to the chat and the Q&A. We'll be starting in just a few minutes here. This is just time for people to trickle into the session so that they can get into the chat and the Q&A. So again, welcome everyone. If you are in the lobby right now, please click on that join button. If you want to join this session and have access to the chat and the Q&A to ask questions of the presenters today, we're going to get started in just a moment here. And we're excited to have you all here for our first set of presentations. All right, I have hit the half hour here, so let's go ahead and get started with our presentations. My name is Anna Ferry. I'm an evidence synthesis librarian at Colorado State University, and I will be serving as the moderator today. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to our speakers. We are so excited to have you join us. We have 3 presentations in this session. They'll each be 15 minutes approximately here. If they go a little bit short in their time, we have time for Q&A right after they present, but otherwise we will be holding and coming back to questions in the last 10 minutes. So please, when you add questions, please add them to the Q&A feature that's available at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And please, if it's for a specific person, put their name, or if you didn't catch their name, put presentation 1 or presentation 2 or presentation 3 in there so that we know who to direct the question to. And please upvote questions if you're interested in making sure they get answered at the end. We do have a chat moderator as well. They'll be providing assistance in there. With that, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So we're going to start today with Catherine Barrett and Patricia Ayala. And if you two want to go ahead and share your slides, their presentation is What's in a Name? The value and positioning, the value of positioning librarian involvement in evidence synthesis as a collaboration.
Thank you so much, Anna. And, leave it to us to open up this conference that has service in the name. And we're here to offer a rebuttal and why you shouldn't use the word service in your collaboration. Hi, it's so nice to meet you. I'm Patricia Ayala. I'm the Research Services Librarian at the Health Sciences Library at the University of Toronto Libraries. And I'm so happy to be presenting here with my wonderful colleague, Catherine Barrett. Catherine, I want to hear your voice from the background.
Thank you. I'm Catherine Barrett. I'm a liaison librarian at the University of Toronto Scarborough Library, which is one of 3 sort of main campuses at the University of Toronto Libraries.
Thank you so much. All right. So what should you call your evidence synthesis initiative? And I would like to ask of all of you to keep that in mind as we do our quick presentation. Why does naming matter? And what does the word service imply? Because if you think about it, the word service has very specific connotations in certain settings. And I have my personal thoughts about that, and we'll talk about it at the end. So I think it's important to set a little bit of context and background about U of T. I know when Amy was discussing how, University of Minnesota is quite big, like U of T is massive as well. There's 40 libraries over 3 campuses, 97,000 plus students, 16,000 faculty members, 8,000 staff members, 163 librarians, out of which only about 16 do evidence synthesis or knowledge synthesis, and not as their full-time duties. So that may be someone's 20%, 30%. There's 15 affiliated research hospitals alone just in Toronto, in addition to other research organizations. And as you can imagine, it's quite a bit of work and quite a mess because the governance is pretty complex. So I think it is important for you to have that in mind, because to try to create a collaboration or an initiative, it's something that would span the entirety of our university, is near to impossible, right? We have libraries that are really well staffed. We have solo libraries as well. We have the college system, in which they're not part of our central library system, but we share the same collection. So there's multiple layers of complexity in there. Now, with that in mind, I do want to talk about the initiatives that do exist, and how we moved from developing those and what was happening earlier on, about a decade or so ago, and where we are now. So I've been at U of T for about 15 years or so, and before 2016, we have started talking about this in the early 2010s, and we saw a lot of different things come up from, there's a lot of ad hoc practices that's all we had, mainly from the Health Sciences Library. Librarian authored searches, there were no standards. Some people charged, some people didn't, some people got involved in the grant, were mentioned in the grant, some people didn't, and how those got sort of tossed around when the specific liaison librarian didn't have time also varied greatly. So we came up with a set of, in 2016, establish a formal service. We reached parameters through consensus and we wrote them out. And of course, those have evolved as time has gone on. Exclusively service the health sciences faculty, and librarian co-authorship was required. Now, let me say that at that point, while we had these wonderful parameters, we also hadn't built a website. And I'm sure, I don't know if you can relate, a lot of these things were shared via email. They were like saved as an email signature that we sent to faculty. And there were a lot of things flying around. And of course, we got our act together and everything was put forward facing. And we made small tweaks, again, always reached through consensus. And we have community of practice meetings. That's sort of my role was created to oversee all of this. And then in 2020, we decided to change the name from service to collaboration. And we made the very intentional decision to remove all the words like support and service from our webpage and replace them with partner, connect, and collaborate. Even in the landing page where it says, we will partner with you through consultation, teaching, and collaboration. And that was very intentional. At this time as well, the University of Toronto Scarborough Library formed the Knowledge Synthesis Service Working Group to develop parameters for these collaborations, and also launched a request form. And in 2021, 2 additional libraries integrated into this platform that we already had built. And these 2 libraries oversee the faculties of psychology, social work, education. So again, we moved from exclusively a health sciences service, collaboration, to include other disciplines as well. And so what does our collaboration entail? We have a set of clearly detailed parameters of who is eligible and what. And of course, as many of folks have mentioned before, the requirements of a protocol. We require co-authorship, but we have the right to remove ourselves from the project at any state if we see methodological transgressions for the most of it, or researchers behaving badly. Responsiveness, we don't accept researchers sort of never communicating with us. And they have to update us about the state of the project throughout the entirety of this process. Methodological rigor, of course. We have clearly defined our librarian roles and our PI roles and time limits that we agreed to discuss in our initial meeting. So here are two case studies, sort of examples from 2 of our 40 libraries. In Gerstein, again, the health sciences first established this formalized set of parameters and guidelines. We also changed other aspects of our landing page or white page. For example, it's not a request form, we actually call it an application form. So that again gives the idea that whatever you are submitting, it is going to be evaluated, and it is not an automatic admission or acceptance. Again, we're stressing out the roles or the deliverables that are very clearly outlined there, and Catherine will be happy to put in a sort of like the link to our landing page for our collaboration. We do work in a liaison model, so there's liaison librarians that have a set of faculties that they're responsible for. Request timelines can be negotiated, and of course, there's also a timeline measure there. One of our biggest challenges is the principal investigator's lack of methodological knowledge and absenteeism, which I'm sure, and by that I mean absenteeism, well, lack of responsiveness, but also a bait and switch, where they fill out the form. By the way, the PI has to fill out the form. It cannot be their grad student on behalf of, or their executive assistants on behalf of the dean of, no. It has to be you. And you cannot do a bait and switch in the lead, and then all of a sudden you start communicating with a research assistant or a graduate student. And so it's pretty clear that, while they're backseat driving because they may have veto power, they're not really the ones at the forefront of these projects. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Catherine now. But before that, I did want to pause and mention that one of our biggest motivators, and Catherine's going to talk about this later on, is that service also implies, about the word service, is that it implies an endless supply for a lot of things. That is not the case. And I feel that if we think about the word service, all of us are in the business of performing a service. The Prime Minister performs a service, doctors perform a service, your bankers, your lawyers perform a service, but we think of certain roles very differently than others. So just keep that in mind. All right, over to you, Catherine.
Thanks. I'll talk about another case of knowledge synthesis collaborations happening at the University of Toronto, and that's at the Scarborough Campus Library. We only started really formalizing our supports for knowledge synthesis in 2020, so we were lagging behind our colleagues at Gerstein, mostly because we have a very small complement of librarians, and I'm our only health librarian, so I was sort of at the vanguard of seeing the request pick up. We formed a knowledge synthesis service working group, although we've obviously intentionally moved away from the word service to try and formalize what it is that we do and come together as a group and share expertise, and also try and come up with more eligibility and parameters that we could use sort of more intentionally across the entire library system. We did have to update some of our eligibility parameters in 2023 because we were just getting overwhelmed with demand, and there was some confusion, I think, on our campus about the extent that students could make use of the service. For full collaborations, we only offer that to faculty members as well as postdocs on our campus. As part of this formalization process, we developed a web page where, based on the advice of our Gerstein colleagues, we used the term collaborating with U of T Scarborough librarians if folks wanted to partner with us. We asked the principal investigator to submit what we call a proposal form, which is our equivalent of application forms. If you're looking for alternative language, that's another one you can throw into the mix. When that proposal form is submitted, the appropriate liaison librarian will respond to have an initial meeting, and at that point, we'll decide what direction to go if we're going to collaborate or not. And because we're a campus library, one of our biggest challenges is navigating whether folks are actually affiliated with our campus or not, because our close colleagues on the downtown campus have capacity challenges. Sometimes folks try to circumvent them and come to our campus, even if they don't have a connection with us. Or sometimes there's mixed affiliations where someone has a grad appointment downtown and an undergrad appointment with us. So trying to manage that is a little bit tricky. All right, Patricia, you can move forward, please. So why did we move away from the term service? We talked about this a little bit tangentially before, but the word service is transactional in a sense. It does imply that no matter what, you're going to be getting a yes as a response, and that's not really the case for us. We're not going to give an automatic acceptance. We're not going to be able to guarantee an immediate or quick turnaround like you would typically get from a traditional library service. We will negotiate with you to figure out if what you're asking for is feasible or not. And we might have to make some compromises on either one of our ends. And we do have a limited ability to decline if there's a good rationale. And as Patricia mentioned earlier, service implies that there's an endless amount of librarian workload and time that we can devote to this service. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. So many of us do this off the side of our desks or as a very small proportion of our overall workload. And especially in smaller library contexts or solo librarian contexts, you're not going to have an evidence synthesis librarian that you could rely on. All right, next, please. So what are the advantages of the word collaboration? So first, collaboration really positions the librarian as an equal and full member of the research team, which gives you more of a voice to be able to address methodological concerns, for example, or to navigate timelines, for example. And you're not just the person that they're outsourcing the search to that has a very limited voice. You are fully able to scope and shape the project, hopefully. It also reinforces or raises the librarian's research profile or identity as someone that you can collaborate with on a research project rather than just outsourcing a particular task to them. We're really being put on more equal footing with a faculty member. And it helps you navigate some power dynamics as well. Sometimes there's a feeling that the librarian might be subordinate to the faculty member, but really this is trying to raise you up so you have a position where you can negotiate, you can set boundaries, and you can say no. And you can guarantee that authorship. Sometimes there's challenges about getting proper credit for your work. And this can be really helpful for a more junior librarian or someone on a contract, for example, who might even feel like they have less power. All right, thank you. And then the wording of a collaboration also promotes librarians' autonomy as well. It gives you a lot more self-direction in which projects you'd like to work on. And it also gives you a greater flexibility to say no to things as well if you do have any red flags that you come across. So you really do have a little bit more freedom to carry out the research that you're interested in and that you have capacity for. Next, please. And then on a more practical level as well, beyond all of those other great things we talked about, having more increased self-determination also helps you manage your workload so much better, where you can take on the projects when you have time and you can say no or set deadlines a little bit more easily, whereas service might put more pressure on you to do things right away and make you have to work outside of your traditional hours to get everything done. And the language of collaboration also supports setting boundaries and having difficult conversations a lot more because you are a partner in that research project and you have just as much voice as anyone as part of the project. And then finally, we know there are situations where maybe a library administrator is set on the language of having a service, or potentially as a service coordinator, you really like what service is able to offer and communicate to someone. And that's okay. This was a personal choice for us. The collaboration made sense. But we have a couple of recommendations about how you can get some of these advantages, even if you are using the language of service. First of all, try and incorporate service as part of, collaboration as part of your service description so that you're really setting up librarians on the footing of being full partners. Also set clear parameters and roles and deliverables and timelines so that it's really clear what everyone is offering and what everyone is receiving, and especially in terms of timelines, making sure that this makes sense in terms of your workload and capacity. And clarify the situations where you can say no and why. So when librarians can decline a project, for example, if there's methodological concerns, or when you can push back on timelines, for example, and make sure that this information is available in a public setting, like on your website, for example. This helps with consistency across any librarians that might be partaking in this initiative. And it also gives librarians language they can refer to when they do have to set a difficult boundary or have a conversation. It's always, I think, empowering for librarians when they know that they don't have to come up with that on the spot, and that that's there and available for everyone.
1 minute.
Oh, perfect. That was our last slide, actually. We just wanted to thank you for coming today to our talk to hear us, provide a little bit of a provocation maybe, or get thoughts going about the language of service versus collaboration. And I hope that it resonated with you in some way.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Catherine and Patricia. Given the time, we will go ahead and handle these questions at the end. We do have some wonderful questions. I encourage everyone to please continue to upvote questions so that those that you really want to see answered will rise to the top. So we're going to go ahead and move forward to Hannah Schmillen and Paul Campbell, who are presenting Flourish Where You're Planted, Assessing and Growing Evidence Synthesis Support in Asset-Depleted Libraries.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Hannah Schmellen, and I'm the head of research services and the health sciences librarian at Ohio University. And today, my colleague and I are going to be sharing our presentation, as noted here, about how to deal with evidence synthesis support or collaboration. We've had this conversation a lot as well, so that was a beautiful segue. In asset-depleted libraries.
Hi there, I'm Paul Campbell. Hannah and I started this project while I was at Ohio University, but I have since moved on to Kent State University, where I am an assistant professor and social science and assessment librarian.
Okay, so first, for a little bit of background, our department, Research Services, was a new department that launched after our library's reorganization, which I've also heard a couple of times yet today. Members of the new department took time to gather evidence, brainstorm, and craft where we were going to go and what we needed to be with our new focus. And part of that focus including providing some sort of intentional evidence synthesis support beyond the one-offs that I was currently providing as the health sciences librarian. So given the growing interest in evidence synthesis across the disciplines at our institution, paired with my experience, we wanted to cultivate this garden and define our capacity for evidence synthesis support more intentionally, but we were not getting any positions or funding, so we wanted to explore what we could make into a formal evidence synthesis support like program or initiative with the existing resources and people we had.
These two graphs show that over the last 10 years, evidence synthesis projects and publications have grown exponentially. This is something that we have heard, Hannah and I have heard anecdotally from our colleagues, from all of you from across the world. So we wanted to quantify the dramatic growth that are happening within the last 10 years, not just in health sciences, but also even in the social sciences. So the top graph, the blue line is the PsycInfo, yellow is Agricola, and the bottom two are ERIC and Business Source Complete. The bottom graph, actually, when I pulled this data, I had to pull out PubMed because there are so many within PubMed that it actually dwarfed the publications in the non-health sciences. So either way you look at it, evidence synthesis publications are really growing and increasing within many different disciplines and fields. So when our new department was created, we didn't have a roadmap to help us evaluate or assess if we could or should provide evidence synthesis support to our stakeholders. And so this is one of the reasons why we created this toolkit. As a new department, we looked at the tools that we could use to investigate the prevalence of evidence synthesis at Ohio University. And one of the cool things is that we quickly realized that we had a lot of data that was already in existence somewhere in the library or somewhere within the university that would help guide us as we developed this new initiative. So one thing that we really wanted to communicate to all of you here today is that you probably also have this data stored somewhere in your library or in your institution. So before you go out and get an IRB or develop and deploy another formal survey of your stakeholders, go ahead and take a look at the data that Hannah is going to outline now.
So looking at internal data, we explored 4 different pieces. First, we had an established LibGuide on evidence synthesis or systematic reviews. We took a look at the trends in usage of that guide since its creation in 2019, and there had been a steady increase of use. Second, we looked at our references and consultation stats in LibAnswers, and we looked from January 2020 to January 2024 and performed a term search in LibAnswers for systematic review, scoping review, Prospero covenants, and the related terms to evidence synthesis, tools, methodology, etc. And we found that the Health Sciences Library and me had the most, but there was really quite a bit of interest from psychology, engineering, music, and communication studies, with some increase over time, especially in the last 2 years. The third piece of evidence that came from our environmental scan survey that the department performed in our exploration of our new department's focus. Part of that survey included 2 questions about evidence synthesis support, which was sent to all faculty, staff, and students at the institution. And from those who did respond, there was mild interest in evidence synthesis. The fourth internal evidence option is to search evidence synthesis related publications from your institutions in databases like Web of Science, Scopus, PubMed, etc., to get a gauge of interest in evidence synthesis at your institution. And we'll provide the search strategy that we did, if that would be helpful to you, in a little bit. Lastly, Paul and I are co-authors for our psychology evidence synthesis project, and we use this as a workload case study for evidence synthesis support investigation. So during this project, we've tracked down how much time it's taken, which is kind of the kicker, right? To perform evidence synthesis at a co-author level, compared open access tool to for-cost tools, and use this as a case study to elevate or to evaluate the percentage of workload and resources in 3 different levels that we've defined for evidence synthesis support.
So these are the 3 different levels of the evidence synthesis support that we kind of honed in on. So given the evidence we gathered coupled with our workload case study, we defined these 3 different evidence synthesis support levels for libraries to consider. We developed these 3 levels because when we started this investigation, as I said before, we couldn't find many applicable assessments or roadmaps for starting and evaluating our own evidence synthesis program. And these 3 different levels is one component of the toolkit that we will be providing to you shortly. Each level describes the workload needed for the librarians, what training and resources are needed, what platforms librarians should be aware of or have expertise in, the level of familiarity with evidence synthesis methodology, and outreach suggestions. Each level builds upon the previous. So for example, if you identify you or your library at level medium, you are providing the characteristics of levels low and medium. These levels take into consideration the limited resources within all types of libraries of all sizes and shapes. It also provides some guidance for advocating for evidence synthesis support within your institution to move to the next level, if that's what you desire. Next, we will be providing the link to our toolkit in OSF, where you can assess details of these levels and how to assess your own level of evidence synthesis support.
Okay, so here's the link, but Paul is going to drop it into chat as well to OSF. So this is the toolkit. So for some context, at the top of the slide is the link Paul will putting in chat. And so from the presentation, we've walked you through options on how to gather evidence or understand your community's interest in evidence synthesis support, which represents the purple arrow in this matrix you see on the slide. And your library's level of interest and resources in evidence synthesis support, which is the green arrow on the left-hand side of the matrix. We've also shared with you our 3 defined levels of evidence support, evidence synthesis support, which are the color-coded boxes in the middle of the matrix, making this the last piece to share with you, this matrix with accompanying checklist for you to work through to kind of assess and define your level of evidence synthesis support in your library. And Paul is going to show you what it looks like in OSF.
So here is our toolkit within OSF. So here is, we published it. It should be available to all of you right now. The link is in the chat. Here is more, if you open this, it's a little bit more about the purpose and the background that we have done. But then here are the 3 different components of it in more detail than what we were able to go into today. So here is the different bits of evidence gathering, the data bits that you can look at within your own institution. Here are the baseline recommendations for the 3 different levels of support. And again, it goes into more detail than the one slide that we had. And then last but not least is that worksheet that Hannah was talking about on how to gauge where you and your libraries currently exist. So you get into it here. Each of these are check boxes. And so you check whichever boxes that you think apply to you or accurate statements about yourself. And then same thing here with the library expertise or desires. And then you go here to this matrix and figure out where you're at so that you can know where to go from there.
That's what we have. Thanks so much.
Thank you all.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Let's see. I don't see at this time specific questions for you, but I do see a lot of love for this OSF space. It looks like there is a lot of excitement about this. Yeah, I don't see a specific question yet.
That's fine.
For you. So we'll wait and see if something comes in towards the end. And at the
Perfect.
moment, we'll go ahead and move on. And
All right,
that'll
thank
just
you.
give us more time to address the questions when they come in. So thank you so much, everybody. Just a verbal reminder, when you put questions in the Q&A, it's super helpful for me if you put the name of the person you're addressing them to or just presentation 1, 2, or 3, just so I remember when I'm looking through them at the end. So now we are welcoming Mark Weiler, who is clearly presenting on responding to barriers. How can mature evidence synthesis services respond to obstacles that impede researchers with disabilities? And thank you so much, Mark. Take it away.
Great, thank you. And I'll get just started. My pronouns are he and him, and I'll have clicks on slide transitions in case people are accessing this non-visually. So my response to the symposium theme is that to grow mature evidence synthesis services, library professionals, administrators need to ask the question, what are the barriers within evidence synthesis methodologies that impede researchers with disabilities? And how can we exercise our professional agency to remove them? And I'm going to largely be focusing on blindness, especially for users who rely on screen readers. And I recognize that blindness is a very broad spectrum, as is disability. So I ask us to be cautious that we don't overgeneralize the statements that I'm making. My central 3 thesis or recommendations are that mature evidence synthesis services require librarians to develop a proactive strategy to remove obstacles. I just said that slide. In terms of audience, I just want to also acknowledge that I understand that the primary audience of this is going to be librarians, but some viewers may be students, researchers, or librarians with disabilities, perhaps trying to determine the extent of obstacles in evidence-based synthesis methods, or assessing if what I'm saying honors their lived experiences. And there's a risk that what I can say could unintentionally discourage any of us when there's actually progress being made. Perhaps I'm being overly critical and not appreciating improvements that have been made or are on the horizon. That's not my intent. There are more obstacles out there, and we need to approach them as an enthusiastic team. As some context, I'm cited and certified with the JAWS screen reader through Freedom Scientific, the company that makes JAWS. A screen reader is a technology used by many blind students and scholars to interact with computer. And I learned the basics of JAWS in my capacity as a web and user experience librarian, but invested more energy learning after a community psychology master's student drew my attention to the obstacles in the library for her as a blind JAWS user. I've accompanied her through parts of a scoping review, and she and I co-presented with her on issues of accessibility in libraries and other public forum. And I want to acknowledge her here too. By sharing her experiences and reflecting on them as a community psychologist, Ashley Shaw has made many improvements and positive impacts on libraries. I want to focus on progress, and I want to give people applause. So the first thing I want to draw to our attention is this is the JBI Scoping Review Network posted a template for scoping reviews, and the authors structured the document using heading structures. That's excellent for accessibility. I also want to acknowledge that recently the Canadian Health Library Association's Knowledge Synthesis Interest Group, the Health Library Association of British Columbia, and I were trying to arrange a webinar with guest speakers about accessibility in the context of scoping reviews, but I just wasn't able to move it forward at that time. But thank you for trying, thank you for your patience, and we will get there. Okay, so let's talk a bit about barriers. And when we talk about barriers, please approach this with curiosity. Perhaps the biggest barrier is attitude. Unproductive attitudes see the impossible. And there are a few ways we can handle this. And the first is to develop recognition. A recognition that there's a powerful creative force in the world focused on including people with disabilities in our lives. Cultivating recognition of this is immensely practical because it addresses some primary concerns. And that concern is that you may feel alone. And remember, this is the second alternative way of framing it, is you're not alone. There have been and are people right now walking ahead of us, already clearing the path by their advocacy and leaving resources for us. It just might not be who or where you expect to find it. For example, as we saw in the JBI example, Microsoft Word has lots of great accessibility features built into it, and that's been the result of people advocating for it. The third thing I want us to focus on in reframing attitude is to focus on your skills and abilities. We all have skills and abilities. Not everyone has to know how to use a screen reader. That's something I have in my toolkit. You may bring other skills as an organizer or speaking up in meetings or engaging with leaderships or making help guides. But we do have to make a choice to act. And that can just be one small step at a time. Now I'm going to draw attention to some technical barriers that I see. And in the issues I draw to our attention, I would like to clarify first a few things. First, an obstacle can be the problem of a web page or Microsoft Word, a PDF article, or the browser, or the application, or a screen reader. Maybe I've made a mistake. So please, let's not cast negative judgments. Rather, let's approach this with professional curiosity and a spirit of collaboration. So one of the things I had to do is I had to revise the press review form when doing a press review. And what did I do? Well, I just went in and adapted it. So it made use of those accessibility features built into Microsoft Word. So this is a style gallery. I added headings to it. I'm not saying this is what I made is perfect, but it was a step, an improvement for the accessibility of this phase of a scoping review. The screening stage, title abstract screening stage, we at Laurier use Covidence, and heading structures are immensely helpful for allowing screen reader users to navigate quickly section to section to section within a document. And with JAWS, you just press the H key or the 1, 2, 3, 4 key or so. And on the Covidence extraction page, I've applied a little style that puts these red indicators in there that says what are the headings. So we can see that there's heading level 2 structures, tags in the list of articles. However, in the title and abstract screening phase screen, those heading tags aren't there yet. So this is an issue of what I see as to be an obstacle in the screening phase. There's hope. The next thing I want to just talk about is reading, because there's at the full text screening and data extraction phase, there's a real need for accessible formats. And for one researcher who had about 150 articles, dissertations, and reports for the scoping review, there was about 400 PDFs, EPUB, HTMLs, if you kind of pooled everything together, and 85% were not built in a way that met their needs. So that meant a lot of stuff had to go through local remediation, or we asked a vendor to remediate. In terms of remediation, when we're thinking about remediation, going through this process, it occurred to me there's probably 3 or 4 key performance indicators. One is speed. How many days does it take to complete a remediation request? Correctness. Is a remediation actually free from errors? Many times when I asked a vendor to remediate something and it came back, I would look at it with JAWS and think, wait a second, that still isn't working, and I'd send it back. So there has to be sort of this correctness process involved, or that's a key indicator. The other one is the capability. Can a vendor handle it? You know, some vendors I dealt with were very, very slow, and eventually I said, well, okay, I guess I have to fix this locally. And a fourth one that kind of occurred to me is capacity. How much volume can they handle when they're doing remediation? The other thing I want to point out that was really important that we've developed at Laurier is a reporting channel. So when we encounter a problem, you know, I might, if it's significant enough, I'll create a report. And this is an example of one of the reports for a very highly cited scoping review, Prisma extension for scoping reviews. What was happening is that the platform was kind of throttling the browser if you were using JAWS. So I drafted a report, sent it off to the temporary head of our acquisitions department, and he advanced it forward at that next level. And through that kind of collaboration, it's been fixed. So there's good news here, and kind of a suggestion that comes from this is maybe we can proactively review and remediate other highly cited articles. So in terms of just this idea of a remediation, because I think remediation is central here, some recommendations might be what is your remediation service? Do you have one? Do you know about it? How does it perform? Another recommendation is to develop internal knowledge of accessible content. Take an interest in how your libraries are purchasing accessible content. Ask department and consortia to present on the topic to the group. Maybe host workshops on Zotero 7.0 accessibility features or Microsoft Word's accessibility features. So taking that interest internally might help kind of this growth. And the third, as I said, is to develop a reporting channel, problem reporting channel. And now I want to shift to the Prisma diagram. On the left of my screen here is the common kind of image we see, the flow chart of an image of a Prisma chart. And these aren't accessible if they're just an image like that. And as an alternative, what we came up with is we used a table, a Microsoft table, and that allows kind of, it's much easier to navigate with a screen reader at least. So that's a very practical thing that can be done. Now I'm going to show a demonstration in a moment, but I want to give a bit of a caution here. Maybe disorienting to see a screen reader in action. And based on the research of Dr. Ariel Silverman, I ask you, don't let your feelings of discomfort or disorientation allow you to make conclusions about blindness. A screen reader is like learning to play the piano. You just don't sit down and play instantly. It takes practice, it takes developing knowledge. You might want to hire a blind teacher or have some blind role models. All of these things help us appreciate non-visual skills that need to be developed. And at the end, using a screen reader is like playing the piano, is a lot of fun. So here we go, and this is with Zotero. I will describe this for people accessing it non-visually. I'm in Microsoft Word in a generic document. I also have a document camera focused on my hands and the keyboard to acknowledge the importance of keyboard inputs. If you can't see the mouse cursor on the screen, then you can't use a mouse or trackpad. So keyboard commands are essential. Both application and screen readers can provide keyboard commands. The user task is this. Imagine I'm a blind faculty member and part of a systematic review team, and I am writing up our findings. From Word, I want to use the Zotero plugin to insert a citation and update my reference list. Okay, what I'll be doing is this. I will use keyboard commands to navigate to the ribbon, go to the Zotero tab, and then activate the Add Edit Citation button. And this will open up the Quick Format Citations dialog. And this is where we encounter problems that prevent the task from being completed. Generally, if a meaning visual event happens on the screen, then an oral event should also happen. If there is silence, then how would a user know that something has happened? Okay, so I'm going to go into the Word document now. I'll press Alt Y1 to go to the ribbon and Zotero tab.
1. Zotero tab 12 of 15. Alt
Y1 again.
1. Leaving menus, leaving ribbons, quick format citation, data : application / XHTML plus XML.
Okay, I'll stop JAWS there. Type the word the
TAE.
to bring up a candidate list. And this is where I have a problem. Notice how there was a visual event, a list box appeared on the screen, and it has a whole list of candidate items that we can choose from. These are articles, titles, and I'll press the down key.
Data : application / XHTML plus XML %3C doc type %20H.
So here is that the text that we hear orally does not correspond to the reference in the drop down in the list box that we see visually. I'll do it one more time.
Data : application / XHTML plus XML %3C doc type %20 HTML %20 public %.
So there's an issue. And as context, I was in Zotero 6.036 and Windows 11 and Microsoft Word subscription version 16 using JAWS 2024 in default alternate user directory mode. Okay, in the minute I have left, I'll try to cover the last couple slides I have. But there's obviously some issues here, but there's improvements on the way coming with Zotero 0.7. And a few week or so ago, it was posted in a forum that this is in the Zotero forum. We've been working with an outside firm to evaluate accessibility issues across the software and for preparation for releasing a VPAT for Zotero 7. We've made countless accessibility improvements in Zotero 7, which far exceeds Zotero 6 in keyboard and screen reader accessibility. And we've continued to work through specific problems that they've identified in the beta. So there's good news and progress on the way. My final slide is just going to be recommendations. I've highlighted the first 3 remediation services: developing internal knowledge of accessibility and accessible content, develop a problem reporting channel, and the last 2 are this. 4 is collaboration. Coordinate with evidence synthesis counterparts at other libraries. We're in the same boat, so we can work together and maybe help fix these problems collaboratively. The other thing is develop relationships with disability advocacy groups. For example, there's the International Network of Researchers with Vision Impairment and their allies, INOVA. And lastly, library leadership support these initiatives. I think that's it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Also getting lots of love for this. And we did get a question immediately for you that might be one we could address right away, which is there's a fair number of queries about how do you get the sounds for the cues for advancing slides?
Oh, yeah, that's I'll show you just one second. In the transition tab of PowerPoint, there's a tab transitions. I'll just quickly share my screen maybe. So there's transitions. And then over here is sounds, and then there's a click option. But the first thing I had to do is I had to go into the pane over here on the left and Control A to select all, and then applied it to all.
Fantastic. Thank you. A question for Patricia and Catherine at the beginning. So you've marked some that you would like to answer live. So one of them is this sort of has either library encountered some downsides of labeling this kind of ES support service as a collaboration instead of a service? And I think that's very much tied in with the other question, which is, has there been any pushback from faculty about these changes or about the increased librarian autonomy or the perceptions thereof, or overall changes in the reception?
So I'll go ahead and start, and Catherine, you can chime in at any point. No, not at all. I think I did answer a question in which all we felt we were doing was really describing more accurately what our role was to begin with, right? Because as other people have pointed out, we took the ICMGA criteria of what constitutes authorship, depending on what discipline you're publishing in. But, you know, like you have to take responsibility for it. We were doing all of those things to begin with. And so by just changing that language, it was just one more accurate description of what our role in this team was. There's also something, I think there was another question that I think I'll sort of tag into this about that was there anything that we weren't getting in terms already, right? Like some folks have really good relationships. It's not that we didn't have good relationships, but you know, faculty change all the time, librarians change all the time, deans change all the time. Because of the enormity of U of T, there's so many folks that are not necessarily on campus, that work at different research institutes, recent research hospitals, or even in other areas, which, I mean, they would fall out of the collaboration, but they wouldn't necessarily have that working relationship with a librarian in which they would, you know, it would be warm and fuzzy and everything would be wonderful. Not only that, as we all know, like whether we have agreements in place that protect our academic freedom and in those like librarians policies and faculty policies as well. But not having tenure or being permanent status can feel a little daunting, especially when you're navigating those difficult conversations. And so having this forward facing page that Catherine, let me plug it in the link of our collaboration. That's the guide. Really help those colleagues that weren't at that stage of their career. But not only that, let's say that you do have tenure, but you don't have a personality or you know, like where that is more challenging for you to navigate. And one final thing that I would say is that, you know, you'd think that these things are a given when you're inviting someone or you're like, hey, let's collaborate on this, that you wouldn't have to sort of have this is how we're going to play together, right? Sort of like this rules and not rules, but you know, a clear understanding of boundaries. And by the way, it's all been positive. Faculty and PIs appreciate the absolute clarity too, even if it's just like, oh, okay, these are the things that I have to do, right? Like a checklist. And you would think ideally that we don't have to do that, but it's sort of kind of like, I mean, I don't know. Do you see influencers trying to, I don't know, preserve sharks and going out there and playing with the shark? And you think that you would have to tell this person, no, do not pet the apex predator. But here we are, right? Like that's the world we live in. You know, you have to sort of like, no, let us state the obvious for you and move on from there. And I'll shut up now because, you know, I'll type in some links and I'll let Catherine speak as well.
No, I think we had a similar experience. I mean, I guess the difference for our campus is we were a little bit later to formalizing what we were doing in terms of knowledge synthesis. So from the beginning, we've always used the language of collaborations. We didn't necessarily have a transitional period or a change in messaging. Like really talking about collaboration was the first time that I think a lot of faculty members even learned that we could help with this. And they were genuinely really pleased because it's a growing research area. I also noticed in the chat there was a question about whether we've gotten feedback from administrators. I'm quite lucky on my campus that our chief librarian is a former health librarian. She actually used to do my job. And so she was very supportive about protecting our time and keeping this work manageable. So she sees the value in using the word collaboration. And in terms of getting the word out to administrators outside of the library, like deans or VPs or anything like that, I think she finds it helpful so that she doesn't feel like more gets put on the library than we could really handle in terms of the volume of this work. So I think it gives her language to describe the value that we bring, but it also helps us a little bit in managing our workload. So yeah, I'll leave it there just so that the other folks have time to answer questions.
Just mention briefly something really quick, and then we can move to the other presentation. We never got pushback from administration. Interestingly enough, once upon a time before this, some librarians, especially who had worked in hospital libraries before, were like, we had memorandums of understanding or agreements, and that administrators were really pushed back on having researchers sign something. But I understood also from their perspective, from a record keeping's point of view perspective, what was it that we were trying to achieve? And so that didn't fly that well, but putting it forward facing out in the public, they had no problems with that whatsoever.
Fantastic. Mark, we had some questions about the process of communicating with these experiences and reporting fixes and problems with some of the tools that we work with, like Confidence, but also potentially with in reacting with Zotero, how does it compare to other citation managers, and also maybe with the response process as well?
Yeah, I haven't had experience with ones beyond Zotero, so I can't comment on that. In terms of communicating with users, one thing I've observed is that some users are exhausted, and there can be, so I do not interpret silence as things are all right. I think what's probably good is to take a proactive approach, kind of be transparent, be out there, maybe host an event, workshop about some accessibility issues, and maybe that might, because I think what people want to see is they want to see that they're not wrestling with this alone, and that there's a team in the library working on it. So the more that can be out there and that can be transparent, like the library could have, we'll listen to a Freedom Scientific podcast that was played and just put it out there and see if who comes. So that's how I might suggest responding.
Thanks so much, Mark. And for our last minute, a quick question for Hannah and Paul. In your work and really looking and digging into sort of some of this, like different levels and what the needs are, did anything kind of pop out at you around structures of services? Because there's a lot to suggest around, we've all looked at the tiered systems, for instance, and things like that. Are there structural things that became apparent to you in this?
Not initially, I don't think. We initially did this for our own investigation. So our context was very much at our institution and our hierarchy and all of that, and what we could do as a department. And then as we were putting this together, like gathering this information, we realized this is a really applicable tool that could be useful, or some sort of gauge of like, well, how many hours of work are we actually talking about? Or like, how much cost are we actually talking about in real day-to-day work with evidence synthesis support? So we're one library. We for the most part, all of our subject librarians are under one roof. So we don't have multiple libraries. We don't have a health sciences library. So our context for this was, I think, probably a little bit more simplistic than what other library systems are going to see. I guess that would be my response. Paul, do you have anything to add to that?
No, you did a very nice job, Hannah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us for our first set of presentations today. We do have a little 5-minute break here. I don't want to take too much of it up for you before we get into the next. We do have a lot of requests for slides and links and materials. So if you all want to send any of those to us, we will make sure things get linked out in places, including that video, Mark. People were interested in that video you showed of the Zotero issue. So any of that kind of stuff, if you have links to it, we'd love to see it. And we will see you all in the next session. Thank you so much, presenters. That was wonderful.
Sorry to jump in. I just want to ask whoever opened this room, please do not leave yet.
I opened it. I will not leave yet.
Thank you, Anna. I'm just trying to capture all of the questions.
Perfect.
Yeah, thank you, Anna.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate it. And great session and presentation.
And last thing, I'm gonna save the chat.
Sounds great. Just got a question, and if we have a social media hashtag, and I realize I don't actually know.
It's a really great question and a really good idea. We should do
I
that.
know we should have thought of that.
Oh my goodness. Well, learning new things a lot this morning, or this afternoon.
Yeah.
For those who are left, we'll go ahead and close out this room, and we'll see you very soon in the next one.
Sounds great.
Bye.
Bye.